Hey folks, welcome to The Heat Seat, a show where we bring you unique and interesting perspectives from wonderful people doing wonderful things in the energy industry, discussing topics such as energy efficiency, energy equity, engaging with communities and customers, unlocking program insights, and more. I'm James, Director of Growth and Sustainability at MyHEAT, where we use aerial heat loss mapping, analytics, and insights to drive energy efficiency program results. With us here today is McKenna Dunbar. McKenna is an advocate, activist, founder, and CEO, among many, many other things, a very super interesting person. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you are the Electrification Lead and Community Engagement Coordinator at the Sierra Club for the Virginia chapter. And that gives our audience a little insight into your work. Can you please tell us a little bit about the work that you've done, that you're doing, and high level why it matters to you?
Of course, I'm really, really proud and just honored to be in this space, and for Jillian and you reaching out to me to include me on this programming series. So thank you for that. Just to explain a little bit about the work that I do, I primarily want to emphasize that environmental justice is at the foundation of all of the community engagement policy and technical work that I'm engaged in, wearing my full-time Sierra Club hat as their building electrification lead based in Virginia. Fundamentally, it's protecting energy efficiency, electrification, and weatherization assistance financing programs for low to moderate income environmental justice impacted communities.
I imagine that you have a lot going on. Electrification is a very hot topic right now. I think in New York, the state of New York in July issued a new order on energy efficiency, which now categorizes electrification and weatherization as strategic endeavors on behalf of utilities and other entities acting in the state, and deprioritizes other aspects, other tools in the toolkit of energy efficiency. So there's certainly a doubling down on electrification, which is great. Also has its own challenges. If your local grid carbon intensity is not especially clean, electrification doesn't necessarily make a dent in emissions, at least not in the short term. With respect to electrification, what is the end goal or mission of this work?
Ultimately, the work that I'm engaged in and that my stakeholders are engaged in is defending the ability for Virginians to have accessible and affordable electrification and energy efficiency services. If I was to choose an end goal, our goal would be for the common Virginian to have an electrified household, leveraging federal funds from Homes, HERA, and other clean energy incentives over the next 10 years.
No small challenge. But to us, you certainly seem like a person that is right for that challenge, that can meet that challenge. So a lot of work to do, but your energy and your enthusiasm for the work, I think, is really just contagious in the best way possible. So a follow-on question that I'd like to ask with respect to low to moderate income, disadvantaged communities with whom you're working, when it comes to electrification, whether that be a heat pump, whether that be electric cooking, stovetop, etc., whichever other measures that you're working on, even weatherization as a whole, is there any message that you find resonates more if you were to compare a message of improving home comfort, staying cool in the summer, staying warm in the winter, versus lowering energy bills? What kind of difference do you see between those two messages and how they resonate with the communities that you work with?
I personally say the attraction for more residents and being able to leverage those funds available from the state to improve the comfort of their homes is really grounded in the public health aspect of the electrification work we're doing, especially because of the geographic region that Central Virginia, Richmond is considered. It was the second, but it is the third highest capita for asthma sufferers because of legacy, industrial pollution, um, medical equipment, construction, and other industries that produce a lot of air pollution.
I should have anticipated the public health message. I didn't give you that option, but I'm glad that you brought that up. There's encouraging work being done in New York. So the energy efficiency order I mentioned earlier does place an emphasis on weatherizing before electrification. So placing both as high strategic priorities, but ensuring that if the home does need weatherization, that is conducted before any electrification occurs. And I know that in Michigan, there's also good work going on with respect to low to moderate income energy efficiency, in that funding has been made available in the past for whole home interventions, so that even if a resident, a building sort of enters a program interested in a small aspect of weatherization, maybe it's a home energy audit, maybe it's a smart home thermostat, it starts a conversation that then allows that person to flow into a program where they can look at the whole home, right? Does the home need a new roof? Are there mold issues that might need to be taken care of to improve the health of the occupants first? Are there any other aspects of the building and its envelope that need to be treated first so that its occupant can be in a good, healthy position to be able to take advantage of then those other measures, which, while important, should not be done for the sake of being done and hitting goals, but should be done holistically with that building, its occupancy in mind first. And so I personally would love to see a more widespread whole home holistic approach taken in other areas of the states by other organizations. Seems like you agree.
Yeah,
I saw lots of head nodding.
lots of head nodding. Yes, lots of head nodding. These are some like questions we've been asking ourselves in a federal implementation BIL and IRA work group that I'm co-leading with a peer. So this is what gets us excited in the Virginian landscape, but also is concerning because there are so many variables that we have to address in the next year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
while the state energy offices are submitting their plans to DOE.
Goes back to that. Lots of work to do. Not so much time to do it, but we're all out here trying our best. Where do you find the energy and the mental focus and energy to be able to apply yourself across such a breadth of work? All very, very important work.
My energy and just fulfillment in the work centers on me having experienced energy burden myself when I was growing up. A lot of people aren't aware of that. I don't talk about it publicly that much, but I do think it is important for me to explain that as someone who been personally impacted by energy burdens and how that was a primary stressor in my life during my formative years. Not having access to appropriate energy efficiency and just weatherization implementation in my household due to being low income and on a fixed budget with my single mother. I don't talk about that experience that much, but I do think now, as I've been reflecting on a lot of the community engagement work that I've been doing for the past 4 years, primarily focused on addressing energy burdens in the central and southeast portion of Virginia, talking to communities and residents who are elderly, low income individuals experiencing these issues. I believe right now is a key moment for us all as a global society, but particularly for the United States to hone in on our community engagement strategies. I'm focused on the equitable energy transition, not just the energy transition, because first and foremost, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by our traditional use of fossil fuels, and that needs to change with electrification and energy efficiency expansion.
achieving our net zero goals equitably. I mean, that's what shines through in all of the work that you do. It's one thing to say as a society, as communities, as companies, hey, we've achieved our goals. You know, if we fast forward to 2040, hey, we've achieved the goals that we set out. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to say we've achieved them equitably and with all the right people in the conversations and at the table and understanding what they may need and what they may not need. Devising policy, rolling out programs, that's not enough unless it's done in a way that includes everyone. Thank you for sharing. I think that makes so much sense that it gives you this wellspring of energy to focus on this, to be able to build on what you've experienced personally, and then try and connect directly with others in that way.
I think that being engaged in the climate mental health sphere for the past 2 years has really allowed me to think more about the holistic dimensions of the equitable clean energy transition, investigating those intersections between energy burdens and how that impacts communities of color, how that impacts youth in particular. I'm concerned about our future leadership because there is not only a morale issue right now in fostering the new generation of clean energy leaders, there's also a capacity issue in terms of having programs, direct programs that fuel resources and funding towards emerging clean energy leaders. Because in 10 years, the clean energy landscape is going to look much different than it is now. Those who are emerging as clean energy leaders and just our professional workforce need to have climate mental health be a part of the conversations and plans that are going to be happening.
There's so much to unpack in what you're sharing, and it's all so important and definitely resonates with me. I think there has been a demonstrated groundswell of activism, of discontent, but also of hope and optimism, and people really demonstrating that this is something that means a lot to them. Do you have that same shared hope and optimism, but in the sense that all those people that see that in their future will get to live that out? Do you see a path for all these young people to be able to step into those kind of roles and work on the meaningful change that they want to see happen today, even if it is in 10 years time?
One of the things that I enjoy doing is through my organization Moko Kono, hosting tea parties that actually talk about the future, have particular cohorts of youth with advocates, a mix of enthusiasts, those who are leading in tech and cultural aspects of society and just arts management. Just there's a lot of different disciplines of people that I convene at these forums, and a lot of the questions surround what do we want our future to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. I think for anyone, I think it's important for us to have a clear vision, a sound vision of what we want our future to look like. Not only does that motivate me to continue doing the work that I'm doing and continue to engage with the communities I'm engaged with, it also gives me hope that I'm not doing this alone. I'm not alone in this struggle. What's happening now, and this is something that I talk about weekly, bi-weekly with my peers who are in the clean energy industry that are, in their early mid-20s, late 20s, is a feeling of tokenism, that youth tokenism is becoming more prevalent in the corporate sustainability sphere or in energy corporations, publicly attempting to mitigate the lack of diversity and inclusion in their overall business plans by having a youth advisory board or reaching out to a youth activist to come and present at a forum. I'm hearing a lot of tokenism from my friends and discontent from my colleagues in stating that their efforts are being tokenized and the companies that are reaching out to them to collaborate are doing so on a very surface level way, a surface level manner by, doing something extractive, paying them to speak for an hour to their company, and then that's their sustainability, justice oriented plan, when a conversation is a conversation until it turns into action, but there's no action that is followed up on. While we are hopeful because of each other and because of the large amount of federal investments that are being injected into the clean energy economy now, there's a lot of concern on tokenism, on the lack of equitable principles as it relates to permitting concerns. And we see expansions of fossil fuel developments taking place every single week. In Richmond, Virginia, actually just 10 miles away from where I live, our monopoly energy utility company are building several peaker plants in a marginalized community. These things are still happening, and greenwashing is still happening. So that's all to say we have hope, but the current leadership needs to do a much better job at fostering the young minds of our clean energy future.
10 years might seem far away, but to achieve the kind of change that we might want to in 10 years, things need to have started happening, not today, not yesterday, many years ago. I love that you do have hope. I call it, cautious optimism or optimism asterisk, where really there's a lot to unpack in that asterisk. I also love Mokokono. I love that idea of the tea parties. There's a similar organization in Toronto called Climate Conversations TO. I don't know that they host it around tea parties, which is very cool, very cool way to do it. But they invite people to get together to have these conversations, to share what a future might mean for them. I think their focus is a little bit around how do you have conversations with your family and friends who may not agree with you and your principles, who may be politically across, the other end of the spectrum to you. How do you have conversations with those close to you and loved ones without causing a rift, in a way that is grounded in more logic maybe than emotion, but where there's definitely place for emotion, because I think we're right to feel what we feel about our future. It's a great sign to see that these kind of initiatives are happening in multiple locations to help equip people with, facts, logic, and just the ability to have conversations and share among each other as well.
Those are very difficult conversations to have because while many people won't recognize it, a lot of us experience climate grief. And for me, grief is just the confluence of two disparate emotions.
I could probably guess which two, but I'd love if you could share.
One of those emotions is anger at present leadership, at the government, and at individual bodies who hold a lot of power, especially in the States, and deploying equitable energy, burden-rooted practices that support low to moderate income communities. So I would say a mixture of anger and hope. I'm sure those were the words you were going to guess.
I want to dig in a little bit to the climate grief and the climate anxiety that we've talked about. There have been several people in my life, friends of mine over the past couple of years, who have come to me with what I would describe as climate anxiety or grief, and yet they didn't have those words to describe it. In the general way they would express that is, I feel so lost. I feel scared. I don't know what to do. Are we going to be okay? Those are some of the comments and questions. And, initially I struggled to find a way to help or respond. I certainly felt that too, but maybe not to the extent they did, because I was always trying to be involved somehow in working in the climate space. And to me, that was that sliver of hope that I could hang on to kind of stave off the anxiety or grief. So, I'm curious, in the communities that you're working with, when folks express those feelings, whether they have the words for them or not, is there a single piece of advice that resonates almost universally?
We are working with a lot of underserved communities who are transitioning from either being incarcerated or being returning veterans or low income individuals as a whole from these rural communities. Essentially, the conversations that I'm having with the trainees, a lot of them who were formerly incarcerated, they are expressing a lot of grief, both excitement and pride in being able to work in a clean energy industry, but they're also feeling confusion and resentment because there is simply not that much being done to include formerly incarcerated people as part of the clean energy transition. I wanted to highlight that because that is climate anxiety, that is climate grief. The feeling of someone wanting to be a part of something, but then essentially on a systemic level being shut down from that opportunity.
You're certainly having a lot of really interesting conversations with people directly in these communities. And at least from what I can see, I think that is a bit of a missing piece in a lot of the work that's been done in energy efficiency, but also other parts of the energy industry is really, not taking enough time to have conversations with the people, the actual humans, the people that are supposedly the beneficiaries of these programs, and really understanding how to design them even before you step into designing at all, actually having a conversation so that when you go to design something, you there's little bit more empathy, a little bit more understanding in the way that you approach that, to hopefully then mitigate some of that climate anxiety and grief that we spoke about. Is there any single message that you find does resonate with people, or any single piece of advice when you're speaking directly with communities?
You are not alone. There are millions of people out there experiencing climate anxiety and eco grief. And one of the ways that we can make this clean energy transition, or the burdens that you're particularly facing in as a result of disproportionate impacts, is simply through conversation with others to raise awareness on climate anxiety. But just also know that it's not an individual level. This involves systems change. It doesn't take a day, it doesn't take a year, it doesn't take a decade. This entails active engagement and resilience for the communities that are facing the disproportionate burdens, and then also includes active and funded approaches to mitigate these disparities from a statewide level and a nationwide level. These federal incentives are, personally, in my opinion, a great way for us to mitigate social ills that have historically been impacting low income households, particularly BIPOC households. And that's why I'm both, excited and concerned by engagement between the federal Department of Energy, the state energy offices, and getting the information out to the communities. So we're all, unfortunately, in this together, but that gives way to, innovative ideas, creative ideas, and conversations that, spur hope in us all.
Yeah, absolutely. We are unfortunately all on it together, but also fortunately, I think there's a lot of potential in going through this all together and trying to collaborate, and, as you said, come up with innovative ideas and approaches. You touched on the nature of individual action versus, call it larger action, call it government or corporate action. And I think a lot of people wonder, and I was asked this question just yesterday by a friend, a lot of people wonder, should I even bother as an individual? What impact can I, the individual, make in the question they're essentially asking is lowering emissions, or what impact can I make in improving sustainability? Should I recycle? Should I compost? Should I get an EV? Should I always take public transit? Those kind of questions. And I think a lot of people ask, well, does individual action really matter? Or should we really be pushing for action on behalf of the larger other side of that equation, government, corporations. So to distill that, I think a simple but maybe difficult question is, what do you think, McKenna?
I think personally, forming resilience in communities is key, and that comes through individual action. But that action is fostering resilience, fostering open narratives about how you're feeling. That resilience is reflected in what the community prioritizes, not necessarily what state advocacy and lobbying is happening during the General Assembly sessions. Because coming from both sides of the spectrum, the state priorities are quite dissimilar to individual and locality specific priorities. So I'm a strong believer in community engagement and the ability for a community to instill resilience in individuals. I, of course, like think like many other people, especially other young leaders for this clean energy transition, that the reason that we are in the position that we're in is due to overconsumption and the exploitation of disproportionately like impacted communities as part of our reliance on fossil fuel as a whole, and that is because of corporations. If we as a society um, banded together more to call out big oil companies and those companies that are not veering towards clean energy progress in an equitable way, I think that would be helpful for our overall climate progress. I do not think that it is an individual spur that needs to happen to fully, mitigate the climate crisis. If all of us recycled, I mean, that's one matter I can like get into later, but it's just my opinion that it's the corporation's responsibility to shift towards active climate action because they are the entities that are spurring the climate crisis and not individuals themselves.
I think, given your perspective on that, I would maybe rephrase not the question but the statement and say that it's not about individual action. It's not that individual action is not important. It's actually that individual action which facilitates a collective, a community, a collaboration among others feeling and experiencing the same things is actually what's more important than, say, the individual action of recycling and composting just as proxies for, contributing to sustainability.
You summed it up perfectly. You really did.
There's one question as we move towards perhaps the end of our conversation here. There's one question that we like to ask for each of our guests when we talk with them, which is, there's many barriers that we face to achieving the very broad spectrum of work that we're all focused on, technological barriers, political, financial. If none of those barriers were present, if there were no barriers at all, what solution would you invent tomorrow to solve an energy problem of your choosing?
Community solar for our monopoly utility companies in Virginia. Well, we only have two, but particularly expanding community solar without a mandatory $50 payment process in order to participate in the program, in the very limited community solar program. So expanding community solar, I know that's not energy efficiency electrification exactly, but community solar, and in turn, being able to create microgrids leads to grid revitalization and stability and reliability, which in turn helps us progress into our equitable clean energy goals and more adoption of renewable energy for the common Virginian household, which is very needed.
You didn't even have to pause to think about that question, which was so fun. I think often we expect that to be a bigger question that leaves people at least scratching their head for a second, but you had it right there on the tip of your tongue. I think that just conveys the passion that you have for this whole space and the work that you do. solar and community solar is certainly an important part of the mix. I think it's the most tangible one for people to get their hands on and start feeling like they belong to a part of this bigger movement, especially with community solar, and start being able to grasp a little bit more firmly to the hope side of the climate anxiety and grief equation. I wish that I could wave a wand and remove all those barriers so you could achieve that tomorrow.
I wish the same.
McKenna, is there anywhere that for folks who want to get to know you a little better and your work, is there anywhere you'd recommend they go? Is this LinkedIn, any other website, any other podcasts that you've appeared on? I know there are a few.
I would say primarily LinkedIn, LinkedIn/electrification/ that's where you can find me. Also, again, I really recommend listeners to check out the work that the Climate Mental Health Network is engaged and leading on for nationwide and international level too, especially with the focus on how youth are experiencing climate mental health impacts. Because I've personally, been told by a lot of stakeholders that I've engaged with the climate mental health side of energy burdens and just, building our future, that the insights from the different resources that they have, and even a short film that I'm featured on where that shows like youth narratives has helped them in their work, which is technical work. So I really recommend Climate Mental Health Network, checking them out. And please reach out to me as well. My email is dunbarmckenna@gmail.com or mokokono, mocokono @gmail.com.
We could have added film star to your list of accolades earlier when introducing you to. That's excellent. Well, McKenna, thank you so much. This has been an absolute treat to get to reconnect with you, to dig deeper into your work. There was some of it that we already knew, but a lot of it that we didn't. And so I'm really, really glad that we get to share this with folks and help them get to know you a little better too, and experience the energy and enthusiasm that you have for the work you do, which again was just one of the first things that we noticed when we met you. So thank you so much for your time. I know you've been traveling a lot recently. And so we really, really appreciate it. And so for folks listening, thanks for tuning in to The Heat Seat, hosted by the team here at MyHEAT.
Thank you. Have a good day.